Welcome to Boss Builds, where we here at Dungeon Mancers take ordinary monsters and make them extraordinary. Today, we talk about skeletons. Now, most of the time, skeletons are very base level, kind of I shoot arrow, I swing sword, and I take a hit, and then I die. That's usually how skeletons are utilized, but that's kind of boring. That's not an interesting climactic fight. So, what are some very interesting ways that we can augment skeletal abilities and flavors to make them more interesting?
Yeah, I think one of the first things that I would start off with, I mean, when I think of skeletons, my first thoughts go to like the Jason and the Argonauts movie, like the really old one with the claymation skeletons.
Okay.
Which I mean, like you said, pretty basic. Just sort of like they're generally like a horde enemy. You know what I mean? You're gonna encounter a couple skeletons at once. My problem with the skeletons, and something that I sometimes change is their lack of the undead fortitude property that zombies get, where when you reduce them to 0 hit points, they can make a con save to stay at 1 hit point, which I always think is tight. Like a con save against over damage, basically. Because then in that case, like, what is it, like a challenge rating 1/2 zombie can be up there for a while. And if you're using like the Strahd zombies variant from Curse of Strahd, where they're like limbs can fall off and like crawl after you, I love that. But if you're gonna pick skeletons specifically, I think a good thing to keep in mind is kind of the theme of the dungeon that you're in, to kind of decide what you're gonna augment them with. Like if you're doing like a Skyrim kind of Nordic setting, you're probably gonna want to make them seem more like the Draugr, would be my guess. Maybe like give someone one, at least like the big baddiest of the skeletons, give him like some magic powers maybe. But yeah, no, I mean skeletons, general atmosphere of dark, and depending on the campaign you're going, I like their versatility of skeletons can be just like the creepy like shambling after you like horde of undead. Or, you know, I mean, skeletons generally have like a goofy context to them now.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Just the concept of the
skeleton bones.
Yeah, just like the whole spooky, scary skeletons. Corporate Halloween aesthetic is really up there.
It's a great time. I like to think that I always like having abilities where I can, because most of the time your skeleton's not going to have it, especially if you're using like 1 or only like 2 skeletons and you're trying to make it like this epic battle. There's going to be like your barbarian, your paladin, your fighter, and they're going to get right up in its face, and it's only going to be fighting that one person. So I like to like figure out interesting ways to kind of challenge those people who are going to be at range, like your wizards, your archers, you know, anybody that's going to be hanging out way in the back. Like being able to give this guy something that, like, maybe he like takes his hand and he plunges it into the dirt, and another skeletal hand like rises up out and grabs onto their foot and yanks them into the earth, and like they then have to make like a dex save, and you know, if they fail or something like that, they're now, you know, blinded because they're in the earth and they're restrained and they have to climb out their next turn.
I think the best, I'm trying to think of how to describe it, like one thing I almost always put into a boss battle now, especially if you're doing like only a couple units on the field, is lair effects.
Absolutely.
Lair effects are sick. I think in what you described, if I was going for like a horde of skeleton, or like some sort of like skeleton commander, basically. I think the concept of if they're standing on like loft, loamy soil in like a graveyard, for instance, the concept of like a bunt, like maybe he can make like a certain amount of space on the field, rough terrain, as skeleton hands come up and or like grapple them at least. You know what I mean? I think that would be sick as like a lair action, just like something that just happens and kind of gives the boss room some variation, because I think the boss room is also, and I mean this is like an obvious statement, but I think the boss room has to be as interesting as the boss itself.
Absolutely.
Even if just visually, it has to tell as much of a story as the boss itself. Why is this boss here? Why is he hanging out here?
And why is he existed here for so long? Like, what's keeping him here?
Yeah.
Like,
exactly.
Yeah, I think that'd be, you know, an interesting mechanic to have on like initiative count like 10. So they're like, you know, you have your party's been like, all the people rolled really high on their initiative. They, you know, they've already taken their turn, and all of a sudden there's this curveball that's thrown into the last half of the initiative. You know, I don't think it's a good idea to always just have your players like have, you know, their plan in their head, always stay consistent through the battle, especially, which is so hard to do when they're only fighting 1 or 2 people, because they're,
and especially low level.
Yeah, you know, they are going to have so many more. Action economy is just going to play way in the favor of them. So you got to be able to give like those little tiny bits towards your boss.
Right. I think that what I like the most about skeletons, just aesthetically in D&D, is you could have a skeleton boss at any level, really. Anything from like a skeleton themed boss, anything from, you know, an advanced skeleton or whatever at level 1, something just a bit stronger. I mean, all the way up to a lich, which is nothing more than just a cool skeleton.
It throws sick, nasty spells.
Yeah. But I mean, yeah, you've got like in Mordenkainen's, you've got like the Skull Lords or the Bone Lords or whatever they're called, the 3-headed generals of Vecna that like are also high level spellcasters. You got a ton of sick stuff that you can do with a pretty moderate enemy. I mean, you've got the Dracolich, just nothing more than a cool dragon skeleton.
Mm-hmm.
Get wacky with it. It's a skeleton.
So, some super useful spells that aren't like game breaking to give you like your skeleton, I think, is the what is the cleric spell? It's like the 15-foot radius, and if you're inside that radius, Spirit Guardians. You could give your, you know, basically give your skeleton a Spirit Guardian spell, and like you could even flavor it to be in it like they see a gem inside of his chest that is emanating this force and causing this. So then that gives your players like, oh, let's destroy the gem, and then like the Spirit Guardians, you could flavor them as like, you know, necrotic energy. A shroud is around him, and it's causing this necrotic damage. And if they destroy the gem, that shroud is now gone, and you literally just take the Spirit Guardian spell, and you take its effects, and you just plop it down onto your skeleton.
Absolutely, another good one. I want to say it's the Chill Touch cantrip.
Yeah.
It makes like a skeleton spectral hand.
Yeah, it shoots out.
I love that stuff. But I mean, you can reflavor anything in the game, really, to kind of suit your needs. And I think that's another big, as the first thing, reflavor spells or make up new spells. Don't be surprised if the players ask if they can get those new spells.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right.
Especially if you got like a wizard.
Yeah. At low level, I think the thing that I struggle the most with, boss battle design wise, is making sure that the boss has cool mechanics that don't do damage. Like if it's not their direct attack, especially like level 1 and 2, if it's not their direct attack, I would refrain from doing damage to them. You don't necessarily have to, but you're going to run the risk of like one-shotting a party member. Which is fine if it's their direct attack, because at that point, it's probably like the fighter, or the paladin, the barbarian, or the ranger who's gotten up close. And I mean, that's
the choice you have made.
I don't want to say that's their job, because that's like saying the cleric's job is to heal, but that's...
Yeah. Usually they have the HP to support that.
Exactly. Yeah. HP and armor.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, Yeah. Even if it's just like a slowing effect on them,
Mhm.
I think could be a cool one for a skeleton, like an icy slow effect. Maybe I'm thinking like if it's like wintry themed, you could have like I'm trying to think. I'm thinking of like have you ever seen well, okay, I'm thinking of a couple things. One like scene from a thing that's coming to mind is you watch Game of Thrones?
I've seen, most of the important scenes.
Yeah, no, I'm in the same boat as you. In fact, maybe even less. Um, but there's a scene, and you can find it on YouTube, where it's like a group of some of the main guys, some of like the kind of like more I'll say more heroic characters, it would seem, are standing in like a small island in the middle of of a frozen lake when a horde of the White Walkers, like the Draugr, undead enemies of Game of Thrones, like surround them and start coming across the ice, and they're like breaking the ice to keep them away, but like the skeletons are trying to pull them into the water and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Shit's all tight. And that shit was so cool. I just like skeletons, I feel like you either have to go a commander and then maybe like a couple support skeletons, or you have to have like a horde. And if you're gonna go for a horde, brings me to the idea that I brought up when I was talking about the boss that I was designing earlier,
Mhm.
of having some sort of like artifact, talisman,
Yeah.
magic crystal that is, some sort of evil MacGuffin device that is
Yeah.
bringing, like, maybe every turn undead are coming back up. Like the skeletons will begin to reform. They have to battle their way, like push a hole through the horde, so to speak, to reach that artifact and destroy it. Something like that.
Absolutely.
I definitely think it's fun. I like the idea of reforming skeletons. I like skeletons that piece themselves back
Well,
together.
yeah, that's like the whole.
Or maybe the skeletons you all kill form back together into some sort of like horrible skeletal homunculus,
amalgamation.
like the skeletal. Yeah, in Ghosts of Saltmarsh, they have the block for the skeletal juggernaut, which I don't know if you're familiar. Basically, like as you do damage to it, like skeletons begin to fall out of it because it's just like a big hulking mass of skeletons, like
that's pretty rad.
glued together. Yeah, no, it's super cool. I love that stuff.
I don't know why,
Skeletons
but
duct tape together is another cool one.
I just got like the idea of like, a non-damaging thing that would be interesting. Kind of.
Yeah.
I don't know why I thought of like, like earthbending, like Toph, like if
Sure.
he's in like a graveyard and this is like his little domain, he gets that paladin nice and close, and he's just able to like shift the dirt underneath them to like shove them away.
Yeah.
Basically, like the ground underneath him literally like rolls away, and the paladin on top of it. And so now he is able to move around again and isn't locked into that combat position with that melee fighter.
Yeah, definitely. Having stuff to push them away from like being like pushing and pulling effects. I really like those in combat. You get some cool ones with mostly with like watery themed creatures, but I definitely think more stuff like that would be. I mean, I love the idea of a lich or a cool magic skeleton that has like Big B's hand, but it is just a big skeleton hand. I mean, classic.
Yeah.
You know what I mean, classic.
Absolutely.
So I guess like in totality, it really boils down to your theme, and your where you are, kind of your concept, design. So like whether you're fighting in like a graveyard or a tomb.
Yeah.
What's another place a skeleton hides out at? The closet.
Closet.
In your closet.
Dark
closets.
forests.
Yeah, spooky dark forests. I mean, you can find skeletons anywhere, which I think is why they're like a very adaptable.
Yeah, very accessible in anywhere you are.
Kind of taking into account those things, I liked your idea of like a clerical skeleton almost, or something. Like I like the Shroud of Necrotic Energy. Those are the kind of the themes you're going to be playing off of.
Yeah.
Skeleton themes are a lot of skeletons usually. generally, I would say that more so than zombies, skeletons border on more of a religious aspect in a way. I always think of more of like the Draugr, or which I would classify more as a skeleton than a zombie personally. Draugr, or because when I think of a zombie, I'm thinking that's more necromancer to me. A zombie, because it's like a gross corpse.
Yeah.
It's been like, it's got like yucky flesh all over it and stuff like that. A skeleton feels more like a tomb guardian.
Yeah.
Usually, it doesn't have to be. That's generally the theme.
You're in like a crypt, and
yeah,
like,
and they're like dusty, and maybe they've just been like standing there, like almost inert for a while, or
you walk by and you see the cobwebs just flake off of it as it animates, like.
Exactly. A cool thing to have, like I would love, and I know this is a little off topic, but mummies with like skeletal support units. God, mummies are sick. I wish more D&D campaigns use mummies.
It's just so hard to find like mummies aren't, they're not inherent to like just one setting where it's like Egyptian style, kind of like that. Like you can use mummies in any setting, but for some reason it's just not.
It's not brought up a lot.
But
like the mummy lords. Okay, we're getting too off topic.
Yeah, this is skeletons.
I want to talk about mummies.
We'll talk about mummies
later.
In
the mummy video.
We'll fucking cover that all over.
Why are you trying to trick me? I'm gonna talk about mummies. I don't know what else to bring up. I mean, we sort of hit the basics on.
Yeah, give your skeleton man some way to challenge ranged people.
Yes.
Give them some way to, get out of melee combat with your big melee dude.
Yep.
And give them some sort of AoE of some kind. Make it, whether it's coming from him or if it's coming from the room.
And here's something I'll bring up. I'm not afraid to say it. I'll put it all on the line. Make your skeleton vulnerable to non-magical bludgeoning damage, but resistant to non-magical piercing damage. Controversial.
It's very fair.
Yeah.
And you could even, that could be part of like, you could hint at that all over the place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure. I mean, that's kind of, that's always why I pictured like the stereotypical cleric carrying like a mace with them just to beat up some skeletons.
Yeah. Get their clobbering on.
It's a bonker. You know what I mean? You bonk,
and you just shatter their bones all over the place, and then make it easier for them to reform into a massive super whatever skeleton later.
Exactly. But yeah, no, I mean, yeah, I agree with you. I mean, the skeletons in the monster manual have the bow statistic.
They have the bow statistic.
If you're playing rules as written, it's actually going to take you a full turn to switch weapons. So the skeleton should probably either have magic powers or should have adds to help engage that back line at least a little bit. At least make sure the party stays together as like a more of a knit group, because otherwise it's going to be the same thing that happens every time. The big bruisers are going to just march their way up to him, while your rogue with a crossbow does 1,000,000 damage from the back line with flanking fucking advantage rules.
And your druid just
sneak
entangles him because they placed it a mile behind him, and it's not encapsulating, the barbarian.
Yeah. I love skeletons. I use them in probably every campaign.
I don't think I have ever not used a skeleton.
Yeah, I mean, they're great low level. Which means in the current editions, there's a lot of like low to medium level creatures, which is good.
The highest level skeleton I've ever used was against level 11. I think they were at the time party.
Yeah,
and it was the animated giant skeleton, and I just had him. He was basically just a beefier, bigger skeleton, and had a bigger sword, and did some slightly cooler things.
One time I reskinned this for you guys at one point. Back when we played with McDagger's dad.
I
Who
gotcha.
came to visit.
Yeah.
Remember that Cyclops with like the cool lamp eye that was like sweeping the beach looking for
Yeah.
the shipwreck and stuff like that, which was, I mean, I loved the visual of that whole scene.
It was beautiful.
But I'd used that before,
Terrifying.
but it had been like a Cyclops skeleton that had been like a necromancer had put like some sort of jewel in his eye socket, almost like a gem of true sight, basically, or like, one of those. And he was just like, yeah, to like look for invisible. Yeah. Ooh, I would love some sort of like, this is a crazy one. Okay,
got a crazy one for you.
Some sort of necromancer, horrible like experimental creature where it is like a big Cyclops skeleton, but it has like a beholder eye shoved into its socket and like magically attached, so it's got that like anti-magic cone of a beholder.
My God.
Isn't that kind of sick?
That would be epic.
Isn't that kind of tight? The skeleton.
It can be anything.
Behold, the skeleton. But it can be the skeleton of anything besides maybe a gelatinous cube. But it could be a cool magic skeleton controlling a gelatinous cube. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it can be so anything.
Of a magical person that's consciousness fused with a gelatinous cube. I don't know. The skeleton could be the skeleton of almost anything on screen, which is tight, which is cool.
Yeah.
Can be the skeleton of a wolf, cool wolf skeleton. Cool.
It just made me
cool skeleton riding on a skeleton horse.
Have you ever watched like Annihilation with that the bear in the cabin? Just like a cool like skeleton terrifying bear.
Yes.
It has a screech, as a human screech. Oh, terrifying.
That movie fucks me.
Terrifying.
Dude, holy shit. Oh man, I'm gonna rewatch that. That's on my list.
That's such a good. But yeah, it could be a massive bear, a dire bear skeleton just wandering the woods, and its skeleton has been animated.
So what have we learned today from our talk about skeletons? We've learned, I think, versatile. Extremely versatile. I would give it S rank versatile.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I would give it in terms of maybe predictability, I probably like very predictable.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean?
You know when you're coming into contact with skeletons most of the time.
You've probably been fighting skeletons in the dungeon already.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you're gonna run the risk at first if you don't like add some cool mechanic. I mean, at first the party's gonna go. Even new players, I think, will go skeletons. You know what I mean? Right? Because it's like skeletons. So use that opportunity to like really like
just flip it on them.
Just come at them. Yeah, just really.
They're like, another skeleton, and all of a sudden it shoots a death beam at them.
But no, I mean seriously, that is sort of the. It's like goblins for more veteran players. Like, level 1 goblin time, or kobolds. It's just what happens. But I think skeletons run the most risk of sort of that. High fantasy skeletons sort of feeling.
Give them a little bit of spice. Sprinkle it in.
Yeah.
Give them some love.
But in terms of fun, I think skeletons can be really fun. I think you have a lot
very
of fun
creative
with the theme of the skeleton.
You can get very creative.
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of media to source from.
Yes.
Which is code for not sourcing. To draw inspiration from. When they talk to the ghosts in Lord of the Rings, and then they're like, okay, we'll help you. And they try and drown them in bones. I love that.
Yeah, a mountain of bones just showers down upon them.
Yeah. Or look at Gravelord Nito from Dark Souls 1, or High Lord Wolfnir from Dark Souls 3, or any of the other Scooby-Doo skeletons.
2, the Nothalic skeletons, the brothers, and they use their bones to sled down the mountain.
You're so fucking right.
And that's one of my favorite scenes, I'm not gonna lie.
God damn. No, I mean, skeletons are versatile. Use that to your advantage. Seriously. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid of their predictability and near genericism. Get fun with them. They are fun. Skeletons are fun, and they can be scary. Skeletons can be scary.
It's all about how you describe them and
it's all about
the things you do with them.
Right. Like if it's like a wall of flesh, but with like skeletons wriggling around in it, that's awful. But if it's like two skeletons using each other as sleds to go down a hill, that's funny.
Yeah, it's just funny, you know?
Yeah. If it's a skeleton killing someone and then making their skin into some sort of like suit to try and rejoin the world of the living in like some sort of macabre fashion, it's scary.
Terrifying.
But if it's a skeleton that can talk and it's just the skull and your party takes it along as a friend, good. Anyways, but yeah, I think that those are the main themes. Versatility, fun, adaptability, classic. Skeletons are classic. And they're overused in a lot of circumstances, and they're just played a ton, but it's because they're classic. That's my takeaway from skeletons.
But yeah, I think that's pretty much all of our thoughts about skeletons and some interesting abilities you guys would maybe be able to draw some inspiration on in order to spice up your skeletons if you plan on using them at all, and maybe some spots where you can go and look and get different inspiration from off of some other random things we have said.
Absolutely. And if you've ever used a cool skeleton that you were really proud of, or have a cool skeleton related story, whether real life or in table, to share with us, throw that shit in the comments. I want to hear your skeleton stories.
Tell us all, and then we'll tell you how rad it is.
Fat boner for your skeleton stories. Nice. Anyways.
I think that's where you have to end it. I think that's a wrap.
Is that the end?
Boom.
God damn it.
Woo! Nailed it.
And today we're starting with Vecna with a gun. And upon defeating the boss, you receive the legendary artifact, the Gun of Vecna.